Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Brian. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of now versus then versus now. Anyways, we're comparing bands' earlier works with later works and to see how they might have evolved over time or drastically changed or refined or honed their skills. This is going to be a very interesting one. Yesterday we checked out a song from Haken's debut demo CD that was called Snow. 6 years later, they would release what we're checking out today, called Crystallized. This is a remake of sorts of that song. I'm kind of curious what they're going to remake from it, but there were parts of that track that particularly surprised me for Haken. There was a sort of alternative rock chorus, there was some growls and something more closer to a very light progressive death metal sound in some of the sections, and being that it was their most earliest work, incredibly lo-fi production, very different from what I expect from Haken. So let's dive into this then, and see what they did to adapt Snow into Crystallized. The beginning of that lick was taken from the original, I believe, but expanded in ways the original wasn't. So far it does feel like an expansion of ideas. It captures the concepts and even uses the DNA of the original track, but reinterprets it, expands it, recontextualizes it. Still a very sharp divide between the chorus and verse, though. Really interesting to listen to a monotone melody coming out of the vocalist, given how theatric they usually are, such large jumps between pitches. Makes it feel like an incredibly intentional design. I am enjoying a little bit more cohesion on this one. More expansions on ideas as that guitar riff in the back is adapted from something we heard earlier in the track. Yeah, really nice build into this. Love that whole drum fill. The synth layering underneath.
Passages of time, passages of time, stripping back the layers of my mind. Chronicles of life, chronicles of life, unraveling a truth which I must find. Passages of time, passages of time, stripping back the layers of my mind. Chronicles of life, was lost has now been found. The life I had to leave behind is crystallizing in my mind. Reminiscing on the past, the bygone time that could not last. Splinters ring across my a bell that will not chime. The crystals lost in my mind. Faded you, my soul was free. Your ways of once was pure. Now has fallen. Reminisce on the past, the time that been found. Splinters ring across a bell that will not chime.
This is cool. First of all, just excellent vocal work there, counterpoint, layering. But also it's bringing in the very folky elements from the verse of the original track that we kind of alluded to during the verse of this version, but didn't lean into anywhere near as hard. And while this is a completely different section than what was in Snow, the riff and the accent pattern are exactly pulled from Snow's Bridge. this whole section. Just like in Snow, it's losing me so close to the end. This is a treat though. So much good happening there. Back to the I mean, I guess we are towards the end here. Makes sense to get back to the chorus to start wrapping things up though. I mean, there's still almost a full song's worth of music left.
Escaping the past by embracing the future.
Objectively speaking, this is incredible. Like a good remake, it seeks out what are the bones of the original. What is it trying to convey? What is it trying to say? How does it say that when it actually accomplishes it? And what parts kind of hindered it? How should we go about those parts differently? It's an exploration and a deconstruction of a work of art and trying to figure out a better way to communicate what that artwork is attempting to showcase or say. I think from that perspective, this song is remarkable. I think it really gets at the heart of what the original track, Snow, was doing. And rather than trying to be completely eclectic, it tries to find a more nuanced, more bombastic way of saying that with a larger, wider vocabulary afforded to them from having created music for many years past that. The sheer fact that this is better produced, has more timbres in it, is more epic when it needs to be, and is smaller when it needs to be, while still reusing many of the same lines, motifs, and melodies that were memorable from the original, while abandoning the parts that didn't really click as well. They might have alluded to a sound, but now they have a better way to represent that feeling or emotion that they didn't have earlier, and they're swapping those parts out while creating something that's even larger and more epic than the original. This one coming in at almost 20 minutes long, all while creating a vocabulary within itself that allows itself to reference itself across the entire course of this track, not just referencing the original Snow work, but also referencing earlier sections, stanzas, melodies, chord progressions, and rhythmic structures from previously in the song, later on in the song, to recontextualize the track within itself, making it a strong work of art standalone, but making it even better within the context of what it was created from. This is excellent. I don't have the vocabulary, I think, to explain just how effective this is at remaking the original. I don't necessarily think a remake is ever designed to replace an original work, but as far as taking an original work and not just modernizing it, but also improving upon it and having it explain itself better than it did before, I think that this song not only justifies its existence standalone of being a great track from start to finish, but also of being a song that justifies the remake. That's not to say that this is objectively better than Snow. They are, quite in essence, two very different songs. If you've listened to yesterday's Snow with me and now Crystallized here with me, or if you're just aware of the two tracks, you'll know that they both have very different approaches to how they tell this story musically, and you can't replace one with the other. Even just updating the mix into something that might have been more tolerable and understandable, just cleaning up the sound, bringing it into more of a mid or hi-fi production, would drastically change its characteristics. Changing it at all would make a new art, and that's exactly what we have here, something new and fresh that attempts to do what the other one did, but better, and I think it does succeed in that realm. And just on the surface level here, we have a track that starts out very similarly, moving between a lighter verse into a more dramatic chorus. And then after we have a verse, chorus, we have an exploration of the musical concepts in those verses and choruses, expanding them, recontextualizing them, creating variation on the original ideas, before coming to a midpoint in the song where we kind of wrap up these ideas and push into something new. From here, for about 5 minutes or so, we have a rapid fire shifting of rhythms and tones and styles and heaviness and layering, and this part really lost me. And actually, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Snow, which also around the midpoint began to explore just an ever-changing soundscape of disconnected ideas, and it lost me there too. I really love how they kept that element in the song. So much of these tracks are different, and yet there's still a very indulgent midpoint of seemingly, at least on a first time listen, disconnected ideas that don't really lead anywhere. We just kind of stop doing these disconnected things and return back to a chorus, which is exactly what happened in Snow. And I found my attention waning a bit. The song was carrying on much longer than I would have liked. In Snow, though, when we finally kicked the chorus back in, we had like a minute to go. Here, however, we still had 4 or 5 minutes left, an entire song's length from pretty much any other artist. 2, if you want to count pop songs. There's still so much left at this point, and I'm going to be honest, I was rather fatigued here. I'm not going to say that I quit paying attention to the song at a certain point, but it was definitely one where I found myself less engaged and less interested in what the song was trying to say. And this is just an issue I have with a lot of prog metal in general, but I feel like Haken is one of those groups that certainly hits this point more often than not for me. It never clicks with me. I always hear when we check out bands like Dream Theater and Between the Buried and Me and Haken, and the rapid fire changing of ideas and the harsh shifts between concepts. People love this kind of stuff. I don't. I'm not the audience for this type of composition. I really need to know why that kind of thing is happening. And maybe the lyrics would help with that. Snow's lyrics didn't, but it sounded like there were a lot more lyrics to this track. And one of the things I mentioned about Snow was that lyrically it was not great. The story overall and the pacing of the story wasn't excellent, though I did enjoy some of the verses or some of the stanzas. Maybe with the more amount of words here, we actually have a little bit better pacing to the tale, and maybe it'll explain why we need this lengthy back and forth and heaviness and disjointedness and wild time signature jumps and stuff like that. But it kind of lost me. And I do find that interesting that it wasn't updated or changed or remade in any way. I think the ideas within that were not identical, although there's so many of them that maybe there were a couple that were lifted directly from Snow, but the end result is very similar, and it put me in a very similar relationship to that moment of the song. And I think that's kind of the big point I want to talk about here. While there is a lot of stuff lifted from the original and recontextualized, played the same melody with an expanded instrumentation. We have horns, we have strings, we have organs on this one that we didn't on the original. We never really got into a death metal adjacent section, and there were no harsh vocals here. But there are more instruments, more lines, more vocal parts. There's a lot of layers going on that the original didn't. But despite all of this newness, there is still an indulgence to the song. I feel like the first 30 or 40% kind of went by rather quickly, but the last half of the track didn't. I really feel like a lot of this extrapolates and expands on the indulgence of the original. I find this one to be even more indulgent. These sections of pure instrumental sections of jumping back and forth between different ideas of sitting within a single rhythmic concept that, yeah, I mean, the riff was cool the first time through, but we're on 16, 20 times through this now, and it just doesn't have that kind of staying power. And then you're going to jump into another idea that's cool for a couple times through, but again gets overplayed, and they're not going to be connected. And the third section is going to be like that, but not connected. And it loses me narratively. It loses me emotionally. And the only word I really have for it is indulgent. Haken loves this sound, so they're playing it over and over and over. They like this idea of jumping between ideas, so they're going to do it over and over and over. I don't necessarily think that tightening the song up, reducing some of these sections by cutting them down or by cutting them out entirely, improves the song. But I do know that having them as they are subjectively made the experience worse for me. I was rather excited at the beginning of the track. I had a lot of things to say. I was pointing out similarities and cool new additions. But by 11, 12 minutes in, I really feel like I kind of stopped having things to talk about because it just wasn't that interesting to me anymore. And I feel like Snow is kind of the same way. Of the new additions, though, I think one of the best, besides the expanded instrumentation, is the vocal layers. We had a couple of sections in here that kind of bring a folky counterpoint to the song. And I thought this was cool for two reasons. One, I mentioned it during the reaction, is that our opening verse, while being folky adjacent compositionally, doesn't quite carry that folk atmosphere because there's a different type of instrumentation used during it. It is this moment, halfway through the song, when we bring in these vocal layers and the lighter instrumentation that eventually gets played alongside it, that we really reach this folk feeling again. It's really cool because it works and plays on the audience having knowledge of Snow. The intro isn't quite what you expected, but they will bring that back later. This is something I love about remakes, whether it is music or film or even video games, is playing on expectations. Having known the original work, you might have an expectation that a story goes in a specific direction, a mood or a message goes in a specific way or is told through a specific means, and you don't quite get that. The film or art, whatever it is, gets to subvert your expectations because they know what you're expecting. If they're expecting, you have to have seen the original. And that's what I really love about this moment, is that when this folky part comes in, I'm like, oh, dude, this sounds just like Snow. I was expecting this earlier in this track. But beyond that, it isn't just that they bring the sound back, but they bring it back in like four-way vocal counterpoint. And you all know how much I love vocal layering. This is just a phenomenal moment of the track, and it pretty much defines like a solid 5 minutes of the song. And even after we return back to the chorus, it comes back in for the outro. All of these vocal layers becomes a defining component of this track, which I really love because to me that is Haken. Or at least it's one part of Haken that I expect from them. Exceptionally clean production values, although I do find this to be better than their ultra clinical sound that they have nowadays. This is still a very clean production overall, though. Intricate parts, and we do have some really intricate parts in here rhythmically and melodically, such as those odd timing sections with silence. Da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. Of course they had them in here. To me, that is a cornerstone of Haken's epics. I don't particularly like them, but the novelty of them will never cease to put a smile on my face no matter who does them. I don't think it's an idea that usually has staying power, and even in one of my favorite bands who have done this in a track, it was cool the first couple of times I heard the song. It's not so great later on. To me, it's always a novelty thing. But, as usual, not expecting it, puts a smile on my face because we hear it. But yeah, we have the production, these types of ideas, rapid fire changes in concepts, and vocal dexterity / layering. And we certainly get a ton of that in the back half of this track. And I think it's one of the great ways that they took the original idea and expanded it. They expanded the vocal work on it. And every single melody, counterpoint, harmony that we had from the vocals, I felt was infectious. It wanted to put a smile on my face so badly, and so often it did. And I think that's kind of where I sit with this track. It's a phenomenal adaptation. I'm glad it exists. It is a very cool thing to analyze, to look at, to understand. By itself, solid track, but I really love its comparison to Snow, to see how Haken had changed and evolved and wanted to take a sound they had done and re-envision it. But ultimately, much like Snow, the song kind of falls a bit flat for me. Lots of great moments in it, but kind of loses me on the whole. It's a song that I'd like to return to specific parts of, but not one that I think I'd want to sit through the entire 19 and a half minutes of again. Let's dive into some lyrics and see how they chose to adapt the story of Snow. All right, so much like the music, the lyrics are in places taken word for word. In other places, they begin the same way but move into different ways. And the overall message, the overall story, though, is different. There's a lot more here, and it goes in different directions. It's very much like the music in that regard. The original, Snow, was about feeling winter coming on, rejoicing about the cooler weather, realizing that it's never ending, and having to bring the sun out yourself to defeat in the personification of an endless winter. This is not about that at all. It says, I close my eyes and slip away and long for change within the air. Hope fills my soul. This is almost word for word from the original first verse. However, here it says, I realize I have the sky under my feet and the sun up above. I am complete and joy fills my heart in paradise. Interesting. So he's upside down, but he feels like that's okay. Now, in the original chorus, it says, someone's calling, snow is falling, the angel is falling, and winter's dance is here. In this version, though, we have someone's calling, echoes of a childhood memory, nothing about winter or angels. This sets up the main idea here. Memories of the childhood. The pre-chorus even says, if I could run back to my innocent days. Verse 2 says, the world of pain and suffering creep into me, and once more I mourn the loss of innocence. Verse 3 states, passages of time buried in the chaos of my mind conceal a truth I left behind. We have a lot of focusing on the past. This is interesting. It's not about the now like Snow was. Snow was being trapped in the moment and trying to get time to unfreeze so you can get to the future. Most of this song is about being stuck in the past, about wanting to run back into it, finding yourself looking on the past with rose-tinted glasses, wishing you could be young again, have that innocence and youth once more. Verse 4 states, memories collide. My scattered soul is almost unified. Talking about a fragmentation of the self based on the memories of your past and how they might create a schism with who you are now. When you think back to who you were, can you even recognize them based on who you are now? You have changed as a person. Are you happy with who you are? And I think our protagonist here isn't. We have an interlude, and this, I believe, is the first vocal layered section. It says snow is falling all around. I think that's a nice little throwback to the original title. It says, what once was lost has now been found. The life I had to leave behind is crystallizing in my mind. I believe this is talking about growth of self, maturation, moving into adulthood, no longer having that life, that worldview that you had when you were younger. You had to leave that behind and crystallize it in your mind to turn it into memory. says, I reminisce on the past, a bygone time that could not last. The crystallizing thoughts of youth, they flood my mind and show me truth. My soul was free in days of yore. I really like that line. He feels constrained today. He was free, but now he has so many rules, responsibilities. Maybe he's just not even happy with what he does. He just doesn't feel like he has that possibility anymore. All of this comes to a head, though. It says, I've returned to the springtime in the garden. I think this is interesting because this is exactly how snow returns after a rather lengthy disjointed bridge is springtime. The everlasting winter has been defeated. Here, though, it says a child is born, filled with delight, and the laughter is contagious as we dance, as we sing, celebrating till the end. Joy and respite on the faces of the children, with a smile realize that their love will never end. I have received affirmation of the Spirit. Falling snow takes me home, and the man is whole again. So it talks about how he's finding a youthful joy and positive outlook on life through parenthood. Verse 8 takes the opening lines of the song and adapts them to this new worldview. Mind open wide as I awake, I sense a change within myself. Hope feeds my soul. I feel the earth under my feet and the sun, my son, by my side. I am complete and pride fills my heart in paradise. It says that there's a spark that acts as a rebirth of innocence as love feeds my soul. This, I suppose, can be what time does to someone. The idea of being stuck in the now and wanting to push to the future. I don't know how old Haken were when they created the first track, but being on the younger side, you usually always want to get older. You want to get to that point of independence, but as you get older, you tend to look on the past more favorably. And I think it's interesting that 6 years later, they decided to write a song about wanting to go back to the past rather than being stuck in the now, and that both of them end with a movement into the future. Almost a full acceptance that the only way out is through. That wraps up my thoughts, though, on Haken's Crystallized. I quite enjoyed these lyrics more than I did Snow's. I think part of that's just the more mature lyrical writing, both the density of it, but also the themes and topics throughout it. But that's just my opinion. What did you enjoy about this track? Do you have a different perspective, different take on it? Let me know. Put that stuff down into the comment section alongside anything else you'd like to add. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.